Icon promised a jet ski with wings. It looked like the future of flying, the coolest airplane in general aviation, and the machine that was supposed to make recreational flying fun again. But behind the dream was a business model that never really had a chance of surviving. Icon sold effortless adventure, convinced the world it had cracked the code, and burned through $370 million trying to prove it. Instead, the A5 went from the airplane everyone wanted to talk about to one of general aviation's biggest collapses, and a masterclass in how brutally hard this industry really is. The A5 was the brainchild of Kirk Hawkins, Icon's co-founder. The concept was simple and genuinely appealing. Take the light sport aircraft category, which was designed to make flying cheaper and more accessible, and build something that felt less like a traditional airplane and more like a high-end recreational vehicle. On paper, the spec sheet was clever. Two-seat amphibian, carbon fiber fuselage, folding wings for road trailering, a Rotax 912 IS engine, spin-resistant wing designed under a special FAA weight exemption, angle of attack indicator as a primary cockpit cue, and an optional whole airframe parachute. Mandatory on U.S. models because of that weight exemption. Icon marketed it as the safest, simplest, most fun airplane you could buy. The prototype first flew in 2008. It collected magazine covers, design awards, and a deposit list that kept growing. By 2015, Icon was publicly claiming around 1,250 orders on the books and talking about a production rate of 500 aircraft per year at their factory in Vacaville, California. That number is important because everything that comes next flows from the gap between what they planned and what the world actually wanted. Icon did not build a small, lean operation sized for a niche amphib. They built a Silicon Valley scale company, big factory in Vacaville, composites plant in Tijuana, Mexico, large engineering and management staff, heavy R&D spend, glossy lifestyle marketing. All of it assumed the market for a two-seat, short-legged, slow amphibian at luxury prices would be enormous. It wasn't. Let's look at what the market actually absorbed. According to General Aviation Manufacturers Association shipment data compiled by AOPA, total A5 deliveries from the first customer ship in 2016 through the end of 2025 came to 221 aircraft. That is the entire production run over a decade. Year by year, it went like this: 5 in 2016, 10 in 2017, 44 in 2018. That was the peak, the best year Icon ever had. Then 41 in 2019, 22 in 2020, 18 in 2021, 36 in 2022, 33 in 2023, 9 in 2024, and 3 in 2025. So Icon's own target was 500 a year. Their best year ever was 44. Their decade-long average was about 22 per year, and that is an order of magnitude misread of the market. And those deposit numbers they waved around? By late 2023, a company spokesperson told the Air Current that Icon still had several hundred of the original pre-orders in its backlog. If that means, say, 300, then total genuine demand across the life of the product was maybe 500 buyers, out of the 1,250 they once claimed. The noisy pre-order number overstated real paying demand by a factor of 2 to 3. Why did they get it so wrong? Partly because they believed their own hype. Partly because pre-orders at a low deposit are not the same as customers writing six-figure checks, and partly because no one in the room seemed to ask the hard question: how many people in the world will actually pay serious general aviation money for a slow, short-range, two-seat amphib whose only real mission is having fun on the lake? The answer turned out to be a few dozen a year, at best. This is where the business case really starts to unravel. The A5 was sold as a fun, accessible recreational machine, but its price kept climbing until it sat right in the middle of the serious general aviation market, competing on price with airplanes that offered dramatically more capability. Early on, Icon talked about a base price somewhere around $139,000. That was the dream number. By late 2017, the company told customers that the 2018 base price was going to be $269,000, with a fully equipped aircraft at $389,000. That represented a roughly 30% hike on the base and more than 50% on the loaded airplane. By 2024, the listed base price had climbed to $409,000 before you added a Garmin G3X touch panel, autopilot, or any other options. Think about what that means in context. For $400,000 and change, you could buy a decent used Cirrus SR22 with full de-ice and known ice certification, legitimate IFR capability, 4 seats, 170 plus knots of cruise speed, and the range to actually go somewhere. Or you could get a nice Bonanza, or a serious experimental like a Vans RV10. All of these are real traveling machines that can take a family on a cross-country trip. Or you could get an A5. 2 seats, about 95 to 100 knots in cruise, limited range, limited payload, and all the drag and maintenance complexity that comes with an amphibious hull. As a toy, the A5 is genuinely cool. As a $400,000 purchase competing against the used GA market, it's a very hard sell to anyone who isn't already in love with the specific idea of landing on water in a carbon fiber sports car. Icon priced the A5 like a serious airplane and marketed it like a lifestyle product. The market did not see those two things as the same. If the scale mistake was the slow structural rot, the 2016 purchase agreement was the self-inflicted wound that poisoned Icon's relationship with the one community it absolutely needed on its side. In 2016, right as they were starting meaningful customer deliveries, Icon rolled out a purchaser and operating agreement that went far beyond anything normal in general aviation. It contained a set of terms that stunned the GA press and infuriated potential buyers. The key provisions included very aggressive liability waivers that essentially asked the buyer to promise not to sue unless external investigators pinned fault directly on Icon. Mandatory factory-approved training and operating rules baked into the legal contract itself. An Icon-owned cockpit camera or recorder that would monitor the pilot. A requirement that the buyer be supportive of the company. A mandatory factory overhaul every 2,000 hours or 10 years. With a hard airframe life limit of 6,000 hours or 30 years. And perhaps most controversially, Icon retained real control over resale, including who you could sell to, under what conditions, and with the requirement that the same restrictive agreement follow the airframe to every future owner. In the normal general aviation world, the standard is, you buy the airplane, the manufacturer recommends training and maintenance, and you are free to sell it when and to whom you choose. That's how Cirrus works, how Piper works, how Cessna works. There are liability disclaimers and warranty conditions, sure, but the buyer is treated as an owner, not a licensee. Icon's contract flipped that on its head. You were paying new Cirrus money, getting a light sport amphib, and signing away legal rights that most GA buyers would never even think to question. The backlash was fast and severe. AOPA pushed back publicly. AvWeb covered it critically. Forum threads lit up. Plane and Pilot and other outlets ran detailed breakdowns of what the contract actually said. Icon walked parts of it back within weeks. They removed the camera requirement, the responsible flyer language, and the explicit airframe life limits. But they kept the no-sue agreement, the mandatory training, and the requirement that the contract follow the airplane to future owners. The legal question is often asked, was this even legal? Mostly yes. In the United States, two parties can agree to aggressive terms in a private contract. Courts might later strike specific clauses as unconscionable or against public policy, but that only happens if someone sues and a judge reviews the language. No regulator swooped in and shut it down. The punishment came from the market itself. Buyers walked away, and early adopters who should have been Icon's biggest advocates became its loudest critics. That is a disaster for any manufacturer, but especially for one selling a niche airplane to a small, tight-knit, word-of-mouth community. Icon needed die-hard fans. Instead, they built an army of skeptics. Accidents were always going to happen. They happened to every GA type. The question is how a manufacturer's marketing holds up when the inevitable crash reports start coming in. For Icon, the answer was badly. Remember, Icon had spent years selling the A5 as the safe, forgiving, idiot-proof fun plane, spin-resistant wing, angle of attack indicator, parachute. The whole pitch was built around the idea that this machine had been engineered to protect you from yourself. Then 2017 happened. In May 2017, an A5 crashed near Lake Berryessa in Napa County, California, killing 2 people on board, including Icon's own lead test pilot and a company engineer. The NTSB investigation found that the aircraft had been maneuvering at very low altitude in a narrow canyon when it pitched up, rolled, and struck terrain. The probable cause was the pilot's failure to maintain clearance from terrain. No mechanical fault or structural failure. In November 2017, another A5 went down in the Gulf of Mexico near Newport Richey, Florida, killing the pilot, former Major League Baseball pitcher Roy Halladay. The NTSB found the aircraft had been performing aggressive low-altitude maneuvers over the water at high bank angles. Toxicology showed multiple substances in Halladay's system. The probable cause focused on impaired judgment and loss of control, not a defect in the airplane. There were other incidents too, hard water landings, sinkings, training mishaps. The pattern across most of them was the same: pilot decisions and energy management, not some lurking design flaw. From a purely engineering standpoint, that should have been reassuring. The A5 did what physics says any airplane will do when flown aggressively at low altitude. The machine was not the problem. But from a marketing standpoint, it was devastating. Icon had sold the idea that you could hand this airplane to wealthy adventure seekers who maybe didn't have a deep aviation background, and it would take care of them. When people started dying in it, especially Icon's own test pilot, the gap between the lifestyle pitch and reality was impossible to ignore. Icon's response leaned into more rules, more training requirements, and more controlled messaging, which, combined with the already controversial contract, made the whole thing feel even more paternalistic. The community that was already suspicious started saying, if the airplane is so safe, why does the company keep adding more restrictions? The A5 itself was not a death trap. The accident record actually supports a decent design. But Icon had set up a narrative that no airplane, no matter how well designed, could survive. While the production numbers stalled and the community trust eroded, a governance fight was burning through Icon's boardroom. Over the years, Icon had taken significant investment from Chinese connected interests. By the early 2020s, minority shareholders, including co-founder Kirk Hawkins and former Boeing CEO Phil Condit, were alleging in court that the Chinese-controlled board was trying to transfer Icon's intellectual property to China at an unfair valuation, while diluting U.S. shareholders in the process. Regardless of which side you believe, the practical consequences were ugly. Management attention was split between building airplanes and fighting lawsuits. Fresh outside capital, the kind that might have rescued the company with a strategic investment, saw the shareholder mess and stayed away. And legal fees piled onto a balance sheet that was already under pressure. The IP fight also raised a bigger perception issue. Icon was supposed to be a proudly American recreational aviation brand. Now there were court filings alleging that its technology was being funneled overseas. For a small GA company that depends on trust and reputation, that kind of headline is corrosive. The shareholder war did not cause the bankruptcy by itself, but it did 2 things that mattered. It scared away potential white knight buyers who might have recapitalized the business, and it burned management bandwidth that should have been focused on costs, production, and customer relationships. All of the problems so far, the tiny market, the rising prices, the community backlash, the governance chaos, could have been survivable if the company had stayed financially lean. A small, low-overhead Icon selling 30 airplanes a year might have been fine. But Icon did the opposite. Between roughly 2020 and early 2024, the company loaded up on debt. Court filings from the Chapter 11 case reveal approximately $105 million in convertible notes and about $65 million in unsecured notes, bringing total debt to around $170 million. Meanwhile, the revenue picture was this. In 2022, Icon delivered 36 aircraft and recorded about $12.9 million in revenue. In 2023, they delivered 33 and recorded $12.6 million. So you're looking at a company carrying $170 million of debt on roughly $13 million a year in revenue. That is not a problem you can grow your way out of with a niche amphib. At that ratio, even perfect execution would not save you. The company itself acknowledged in its bankruptcy filings that a combination of supply chain problems, type certification delays, and ongoing litigation had pushed it into a financial corner from which there was no market-based exit. On the 4th of April 2024, Icon filed for Chapter 11 protection in Delaware. A few months later, the court approved the sale of essentially all of Icon's assets: the Vacaville factory, the Tijuana composites plant, the Florida facility, the tooling, the type certificates, the brand, to SG Investment America, a subsidiary of the Shandong Group, for approximately $15.8 million. $170 million in debt, $15 million in sale proceeds. That is what happens when every off-ramp gets missed. So that's it for today's video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. It goes a long way for us.